It's already going to be. Thank you, Zoom. Welcome, everyone. All of the family and friends of the writers, former and other current students I see in the audience, future students I see in the audience. I'm delighted to see all of you. I especially want to welcome tonight's distinguished guests, though, the writers from the 2021 online novel writing project. Jenny mentioned that there were 8 readers tonight. That's actually 7. We're down to 7. One of the other students who's been courageously, frankly, battling a more serious illness this year isn't able to make it tonight as well. So as much as I hate to say that and to announce that, I'm still excited to hear from the others. It has been a hectic year, and it wouldn't be sort of, I wouldn't expect anything less than to have a couple of people have to miss this final and momentous occasion. Before I get on with things, I want to say thank you to Jenny. And to all the folks at the Loft who've been dealing with the same situation that we all have over the past couple of years. I feel in a lot of ways, however, that things are even more topsy-turvy at the Loft than other places. There's been leadership changes, there's been programming changing, there's been a lot of changes at the building, and I know how much stress it has caused you over the last year, Jen. And I just want to say that from where I sit and from where my students sit, it's felt seamless. And that's a testament to your thoroughness and your good work and your commitment to these programs and to these students as well. So thank you for that. You're a dear friend, and we make a great team. So I really appreciate all of that.
Thank you, Peter. That's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. As I mentioned, we've been, as a group, toiling through this last year, meeting, 32 times over the course of the year, talking about a bunch of terrific novels, 7 of which you'll get to hear a little bit from later on tonight. And I want to say something generally about this year's group, both this class and the class that meets on Thursday night and who will be doing their reading on Thursday night. I think collectively, and all things considered, the work that has come out of this year is maybe even more remarkable than any of the years previous. And I say that not lightly and not as a blight on any of the previous years, but because of all that we've been through as a group and as a society and as a country and as a community of writers. Each week, these folks turned up for each other and for themselves. They worked themselves tirelessly. They supported each other tirelessly. And it's been a true inspiration to witness it and to be a part of it. And I thank you all so much for that hard work. You are resilient, you are incredibly diligent, and you're incredibly gifted as well. And I want to say that plainly. It's been my honor, as I say, to share the last year with you. I can't wait to see what the future holds for each of you. I'm in the middle of reading the novels now. This program works where the students write their novels over the course of the year. And then in January and February, I read them all. So I'm in the middle of that process now. And my goodness, what a bunch of fabulous work. What's in store for you tonight? Well, we have a handful of literary novels. We have a pair of very different dystopian novels. One a little bit darker, I think, one a little bit lighter. And we have a wonderful mystery by one of our novelists tonight. The order that we'll be hearing from the readers was determined by names drawn from a hat, literally names drawn from a hat. And so that's how we ended up in the order that we're in. Each of tonight's writers will give a 7 or so minute presentation. In the best of worlds and in the best of times, there would be an opportunity to ask questions. There won't be, unfortunately, but as Jenny said, hopefully if people want to stick around for a little while and talk with each other, ask questions of the author, we can do that at the end of the night. And that's what I have by way of introduction. We're going to get right into it. The stars of the show are all lined up. I've checked. They're all here. And our first reader tonight is John Vely. He's one of those writers totally unafraid to confront the demons in his characters. What's more, in his novel Refuge, he does so with compassion and humor, even when neither seem to be in much supply. The story he tells is a timeless one. An absentee father inclined to overindulging in his vices, a daughter at loose ends, and a tension between the two of them that at times is as taut as a piano string, all lend his book a gargantuan feeling. If you enjoy this reading half as much as I've enjoyed his work over the year, you'll be a happy attendee indeed. So, kicking things off tonight, Don't Call Me John, Vely.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I'll get right on it. First of all, I just want to say my book is about a contemporary multi-generational family living in northern Minnesota, dealing with the consequences of abandonment. There are three main characters: Harlan, his daughter LaDonna, and Lizard Brain, the voice inside Harlan's head who tells Harlan what to do. This scene, I'll read, takes place in the morning after Harlan, who's been absent for many years, unexpectedly reappears in LaDonna's life. Harlan wakes, sniffs, and grimaces. He is lying face down on a urine-scented pillow. His arms are pinned beneath him, and those arms, along with the rest of his body, are wrapped burrito tight inside a dirty green bedspread. 1,000 needle pricks emanate from his very asleep and still booted left foot. What the fuck, he softly moans as he lifts his head into the dim gray light to survey his surroundings. First up, the surface of a long World War II era gun crate just inches from his gaze. It's covered in the detritus of a party crowd. A glass with a floating cigarette butt, a tipped over bong, 2 empty wine bottles, a half dozen crushed beer cans, an ancient green ashtray mounted with more cigarette butts, a scatter of chips, a game controller, and a remote control. Next, in the background, on the floor in the far corner of the room, lies a small dog. Her merle coat, a mottled mix of blue and white, black and tan. Harlan stares. The dog raises its head and stares back. The dog's been waiting and watching him for hours. It's got one blue eye and one brown, but from this distance, they both look like shiny black pebbles. What's up with the dog, he wonders out loud. The dog gives no clue. There's no tail wag, no growl, no movement. Just that stare. The blankness of it unnerves Harlan, so he shifts his gaze away. I need a smoke, he whispers. But he can't smoke. In fact, he can barely move. He shuts his eyes, lowers his head, and takes a deep breath. Jesus, is that dog piss or cat piss? He gives his body a mighty yank and he crashes. Harlan is now floor-bound, wedged tight between sofa and crate. God damn it, he cries, his voice a practiced mixture of outrage and self-pity. He is stuck again. He hears footsteps on hard linoleum and then a voice that calls out. What's going on? It's a voice he knows. It's LaDonna, he remembers. I'm at LaDonna's. The footsteps move onto the carpet. He hears her whisper, "You're so pathetic." And then her hands appear at one corner of the crate. She tugs, but the crate stays firm. "Jesus," she says, "what's Terry got in here, a body?" She tugs again, and the beer cans and wine bottles go tumbling. 3 cans hit the floor, and another hits Harlan smack in the face, spilling an acrid dribble of cigarette ash and stale beer onto his lips and cheeks. The dog is right there, licking. "Willow, get off him," orders LaDonna. The dog obeys and backs off. She tugs the crate a third time, giving Harlan the space to sit up and untangle his arms. He grabs a crumpled napkin from the crate top, wipes his face, and spits into it. "Whose dog is that?" he asks. "She's mine," says LaDonna, laughing. "I got her last week. She's a rescue dog, and I named her Willow because she's so graceful and bendy. I think she was trying to rescue you." "Real funny, Countess Harlan. Say, do you have a cigarette? I could really use a cigarette." "Sure, no problem," says LaDonna as she pulls a pack of yellow spirits from her sweater pocket. He watches her delicate fingers fish one out. The fingers of a child, he thinks, just like her mom. He takes a cigarette, lights it, and takes a deep drag. "Where's Terry?" he asks. "He's gone," answers LaDonna. "I took him to the Amtrak early this morning. He's on his way to Williston. He'll be gone for 6 months. Harlan ponders this news for a moment. "Good money, right?" "Yeah, good money," says LaDonna. "Real good money." She places the cigarette pack on the gun crate next to her wallet. The wallet's open, revealing her driver's license, a cascade of credit cards tucked in their slots, and the corner of a $100 bill peeking from the top. She watches, alarmed, as Harlan's eyes quickly pivot from cigarette pack to wallet. "Oh shit," she thinks. "He's gonna tap me for cash. I know it, I just know it. He's such a fucker. Blabbing bullshit to Terry at the bar last night, and now he'll be coming after my money." But the tap doesn't come. Harlan's just too fast. His eyes caught hers, watching his, and he knows the drill. The shit she'll shovel if he pops the ask. So he stays silent, and so does LaDonna. But their silence does not mean the argument is not taking place. It is. She's saying, "Why do you even think of hitting me up for money? It should be the opposite. You should have been helping me all these years." He's saying, "You wouldn't miss it. You guys are loaded, especially now. I took care of you. Why do you have to make such a big fucking deal out of it?" If they actually spoke the argument, it would take minutes and minutes and minutes. But it's mind talk. 100 sheets of intense dialogue distilled to atoms and communicated at light speed by their sweat scents and the patterns of their fluttering eyelashes. The intensity of it sends Willow barking and racing around the room. "Look at that stupid dog," says Harlan under his breath. "I can't stand hyper dogs." While LaDonna tries to corral Willow, Harlan's internal chatter keeps chugging along. Lizard brain is kicked in and it's stewing a familiar broth. "You could have had a career," says the lizard. "You could have been a lawyer. You could have made big money, but Sydney had to get pregnant. And look what you got now. Nothing, nothing. And look at the two of them, big cash coming in the box and whatever else mom had. I mean, shit, LaDonna ditched her kid, and now she's got a dog. Look at her chasing after that fucking dog." "Dad," says LaDonna, "Dad." Harlan doesn't respond. He can't hear her. Lizard brain is too loud. "And you're an asshole for needing money? If you had 1/10 of what you spent on her, there should be some kind of payback. Remember, Harlan, you helped your mom." "I helped my mom," mumbles Harlan. "Dad?" says LaDonna. She's captured Willow by her collar, but Willow's not having it. She's spinning, twisting, and curving like some kind of a dog Houdini escaping a straitjacket. "Harlan," she snarls. The harshness of it grabs Harlan's attention. "What?" he snaps. Willow breaks free twists LaDonna's wrist in the process and makes a mad dash to the kitchen. Ah, shit, says LaDonna. Dad, you're untangled, right? Come on into the kitchen, okay? I gotta feed Willow. We've got stuff to talk about. That's it.
Thanks so much, John, or Vely. Sorry, don't call me
No
John.
worries.
It's wonderful to see that scene again and to hear that scene again. Thank you. Our second reader tonight is Jeff Chant. What do you get when you combine a precocious young girl with an outsized intelligence and a penchant for solving crimes, a dead body floating in the cove of a Newfoundland fishing village, an extended family that's as twisted up as a kicked around rope on the bottom of a skiff, and a regiment of Canadian Mounties? Well, in the tenacity of Wayward Island Limpets, you get a book that's as charming as it is smart and as wonderfully written as anything we read all year. One full of characters you can't, indeed won't forget, and poised to launch a whole series of books in its wake. Jeff, take it away.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to read the opening scene from the novel. Chapter 1, Cold Waters. Friday, June 15th, 1956. The waters of Notre Dame Bay are deadly cold. That's not a good thing if you're a fisherman who's fallen out of his boat. You won't last more than a few minutes, even if you can swim, and most fishermen can't. On the other hand, frigid water is a good thing if you're rowing your dory across Ballycatter Cove and you thud into a bobbing corpse. Cluny McPherson was surely dead, but at least the icy waters had kept him fresh. I paused in mid-feather, staring in disbelief as Cluny's corpse drifted down the side of my dory. I carefully shipped the oars. I tucked my dress between my knees, pulled my bonnet down tight, and shifted closer to the gunwale for a better look. His corpse didn't seem bloated. I leaned closer and gave a tentative sniff. He wasn't at all smelly. I drew back and examined his craggy old face. There was a film over his eyes, a luminous, milky caul, like the cataracts Mr. Mercer had when he dropped stone dead at the Orange Hall last Christmas at the age of 102, while dancing a caper with a big toothless grin on his face. Cluny McPherson wasn't grinning, though. Cluny's mouth gaped open like a fish on a jig. Other than a bluish tint to his skin, the ghostly eyes, and what I could only assume was a long-term dedicated avoidance of oral hygiene, he looked in perfectly good health. He couldn't have been in the cove for long, or the crabs would have been at him. They go for eyes and lips first, and earlobes and other soft bits. Or so I've been told. I've never had the pleasure of examining their handiwork myself. Local lore has it they can strip a corpse clean to the bone in a matter of days. I'd been rowing across the cove on my way to school. I was wearing my prized majorette boots, a gift from Uncle Arthur on my 13th birthday, my second best dress, my third best pinafore, and the cable stitch cardigan Aunt Catherine forced me to knit last winter despite my most strenuous objections. Elspeth Blackmore, I told myself, you're not properly dressed for dealing with a corpse. But Ballycatter Cove is a fishing outport on Wayward Island in northern Newfoundland, and those unfortunate enough to live in a fishing outport must buck up and make do. So I rolled up my sleeves, tucked my dress between my knees, and used an oar to snag Cluny and slew him closer. Cluny had retired from fishing long before I was shipped here. I didn't know much about him, but I knew he'd been living like a hermit on the Tuckamore several miles inland. Wayward Island's version of Silas Marner, without the abandoned toddler and redemption and all that, and without the happy ending, judging by his current condition. But the weaver of Raveloe hoarded gold, and a poor bayman like Cluny would have hoarded something far less precious. Rum, I would guess, from what was gossiped at the merchant store. Dark Demerara rum, smuggled up from Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, the stuff they call screech in these parts. They say Cluny could be heard from half a league away howling at the moon when he over-imbibed. I'd seen him out and about, but he didn't hang about around the wharf and gab with the other old-timers. He'd become a hang-ashore after he gave up making fish. A come day, go day, God send Sunday kind of fellow. He probably didn't even own a boat anymore. So what was he doing in the middle of the cove all drowned? I plopped back down on the thwart and watched, fascinated, as cold seawater gurgled around his few remaining teeth. In my 13 years, 4 of them in this dismal place, I'd never found a fresh corpse before, or an unfresh one for that matter. Clunny kept trying to drift away, so I grabbed the end of a rope that was coiled in the bottom of my dory. Having spent 4 years incarcerated amongst fishermen, I know my knots. I know knots for rigging jigs, knots for knitting nets, knots for binding killocks, and even knots for tying off dismembered limbs. I know knots for just about any necessity, but I wasn't sure what knot would be best for towing a corpse. I decided on a buntline hitch, a knot that tightens when jerked, with the other end clinched to my port cleat. I knew the towing would be easiest if I hitched the buntline around his neck, less drag, but somehow that didn't seem proper. If I tied off on an ankle, his legs would splay and spin him through the water like a gaffed turbot. Tying off on both legs would work, but it would look like it was being dragged by a horse, like in that Western picture show Reverend Clark put on at the Orange Hall in the spring, the one with that Gregory Peck fellow, and that didn't seem appropriate either. So I settled on his left wrist, confident he was fresh enough his arm wouldn't pop off. When he was properly secured, I stepped up on the thwart. I surveyed the shoreline, wondering where I should tow Clunny. On the western shore, I spied the horde of barbarians I begrudgingly call classmates. They were running about in the schoolyard next to St. Swithin Anglican Church. I could hear their shrieking and hollering all the way across the water. It was not unlike the squabbling made by herring gulls as they follow a fish-laden schooner into the cove, hoping to feast on a slurry of fresh entrails. Sadly, this is typical behavior for Ballycatter children, one of the burdens I must bear in this dreary place. When I am older, I expect the shrieking of children will give me migraines. To the north was the mouth of the cove, with the grim waters of Notre Dame Bay beyond. The Bay of Our Lady, named by the French in the early 1500s. I expect the Beothuk Indians had their own name for it, but we killed them all, so the real name has been long forgotten. Wide, cold, unforgiving. There were several icebergs out in the bay, slowly drifting by the mouth of the cove, one of them big as a mountain. I could feel their cold carried in on the breeze and smell the icy metallic tang they carry down from Greenland. Sometimes I sit out on Blowy Down Arm and watch them float by, wishing I could swim out and climb aboard and drift away from this place. But they don't get much further south than Halifax, so what would be the point? What I needed was an iceberg that would drift due east, straight across the Atlantic, back to England and civilization. To the south was the outport, Ballycatter Cove, my home these past 4 years. Its shoreline was cluttered with fishing stages, but they were mostly deserted. The fishermen had set off in their skiffs and their rodneys long before dawn. They'd be working like devils throughout the summer and into the fall, making fish as fast as they could before the season was over. You can say what you want about outport fishermen, and I often do, but you can't call them shiftless. Already I could see hundreds of quintals of cod, white as snow, drying on the flakes that circle the cove. The shoreline was rocky and barren, with large boulders strewn among the scattered white houses and red-painted stores. Further back, the Tuckamore rose in rolling hillocks of grasses and wildflowers and a low-lying scrub. Not a willow or an oak or a sycamore to be seen, just rock and grass and scrub and more rock. I don't like living in an outport, and that's an understatement. But I have to admit, the rocky shore, with its red stages and stores, its brightly painted rodneys and skiffs, is as pretty as a picture, even if there are no trees. There's something peaceful and safe about Ballycatter Cove, even if it is as backward a place as ever there was. But when I looked back down at the bobbing corpse of Clunny McPherson, it suddenly didn't seem so cozy. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I love that book. Our third reader tonight is Lori Siegel. A young woman on multiple quests is at the heart of her book, The Wanderer. What begins as a traumatic reunion with her father on the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota ends in a lush Mexican paradise, or so it seems. In between, our heroine, Ava, follows the path of the migrating monarch butterflies and undergoes similar transformations. This novel is fierce in its exploration of a young woman making the first significant discoveries of her life, thoughtful in its consideration of the ecological disaster we're living through, and full of pathos and sublime imagery on all accounts. And Lori Siegel has been an absolute pleasure to work with this year. Lori, take it away.
All right, thank you, Peter. And thank you for your expert guidance and dedication to us over the past year. We are also grateful to you. Thank you to my classmates as well, who were so thoughtful and generous in your feedback to each other. The group's faithfulness to one another throughout the year was just a really beautiful thing. Thank you to all my family and friends who came tonight. I see so many friendly faces. Thank you for coming. It means so much to have you here. All right, so the excerpt I'll be reading tonight is from the first of the three movements of the novel. It is one of the darker, heavier moments in the book. So I just want to assure you, should you ever consider reading the entire book, it does become more light-filled and uplifting as it goes. I chose the scene I did because it can stand alone really well, given that no one here has read the book yet. In this scene, the 18-year-old protagonist, Ava, has tracked down her absentee alcoholic father, an oil worker in the Bakken, and he is living in a repurposed Hurricane Katrina FEMA trailer, one of the many housing solutions used for the influx of workers during the boom. These trailers tended to have formaldehyde issues, so they made people very sick. The novel is set in 2017 after the boom went bust. Let's see, Ray in the scene is a friend Ava has made along the way who is helping her find her father. And also important to know at the end of the excerpt is that Ava has a super fixation with the National Geographic magazine, as her father collected them when she was a young child. All right, here we go. Ready? Ray asks. I nod, take a deep breath, step up the slanting wooden steps, and knock, and knock, and knock. I try the handle, it turns, I push. The sour vinegar air smacks me in the face. It's dark inside, the windows covered with towels and blankets. I step into a small kitchen, the sink and counter full of dishes, trash, Ray close behind me. I call out, softly at first, Dad? It feels weird, inaccurate, to call out to a man I haven't seen in 9 years with the endearment Dad. We are strangers. Then louder, Jonas? I peer to the left at what is a small sitting area with a stiff-looking built-in Naugahyde couch. Empty Jack bottles and Marlboro packs litter the room, and 3 overflowing ashtrays convene on a small table. Jonas? Jonas. Then a faint, gravelly, yeah, who's that? From a room to our right. I'm pulled toward its familiar resonance, that thunder. Now so far in the distance and muted, it sounds like it's in the next county. If you look at a brain scan of someone with wet brain syndrome, or formally Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, you will see a dark moth stretching its wings at the center of the brain. The damage beautifully symmetric, an excellence of proportion. It extends its dark wings, eating ability and memory like a wool sweater. This ever-enlarging moth is the neuroradiological calling card of Wernicke's, a result of thiamine depletion, its most typical antecedent being chronic alcohol dependence. The areas of the brain affected include the mammillary bodies, periaqueductal and periventricular gray matter, collicular bodies, and the thalamus, the cerebral bodies responsible for memory. The infratentorium at the back of the brain, just below the tentorium cerebelli, is also impacted, causing ataxia, affecting gait and stance. Ataxia, noun, pathology, a loss of coordination of the muscles, especially of the extremities. Some of its synonyms include muddle, awkwardness, confusion, daze, difficulty, disarrangement, disarray, disorder, pell-mell, helter-skelter, fog, haze, plight, snarl, jumble, trouble, shambles, tangle, struggle, mess, and a half. If not adequately treated with thiamine repletion, Korsakoff syndrome, with its symptomatic trademark of global amnesia, takes hold. Additionally, formaldehyde is a well-established neurotoxin that affects memory and behavior. Formaldehyde-induced alterations in metabolism of brain cells may contribute to the impaired cognitive performance observed after long-term formaldehyde exposure. Exposure to formaldehyde, combined with advanced Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, has not been adequately studied among meaningful populations. Cumulative effects are qualitative in nature and extremely, terribly bad. But I don't actually know any of this. Of course I don't. The name of, much less the details concerning my father's disease or the effects of the formaldehyde are not known to me. The disastrous course of the pathology has never appeared before me in an issue of National Geographic or a book of age and proper Greek myths read to me in the sweet, low voice of my mother while I lay tucked in my bed, or in any of the hundreds of books I wolfed down at the public library. What I know, all I know, is that my father is lying in front of me in his own filth.
Just fabulous, Lori. Thank you. Our fourth reader tonight is Heather Meyer. In one of the most inventive novels I've had the pleasure of working on in any of the 5 years I've taught this program, the wild and rowdy cast of Bard must navigate a world in which any reference to Shakespeare in any context is not only barred, but policed and criminalized. Of course, we're so culturally beholden to Shakespeare that any such world is impossible. Couple that with the renegade group of individuals who revere and wish to honor Shakespeare, and well, you have the makings of a thoughtful romp. This book is as funny as it is scary, and as wise as it is wisecracking. Heather, take it away.
Well, first, thank you so much to Peter Guy for this incredible year of guidance, wisdom, and passion. You've been, I called it to myself, a trail guide in this wilderness of novel writing. And thank you to my Tuesday cohort. Tuesdays will never be the same. All your feedback and your thoughtfulness and the honor of getting to be a part of all of your novels coming to life has just been an incredible treat this year. And thank you to my friends who have been cheerleaders and who are here to listen, and all of my theater artist friends, my theater coworkers, and all my theater enemies that we lovingly all create as well, who have helped infuse this work. I'm going to read from the very first scene. Okay. Number 1, a supernatural tulip infiltrates a fast food chain, an abstract play. Number 2, 3 people find harmony by befriending a monster under the bed, a surrealism play. 3, a dog meets with a lawyer who is actually also a dog, a 3-play epic cycle. Number 4, and one more, said Ellen, tapping her hands on her knees. She needed 4 original ideas for the innovation inspiration form, which she weekly submitted to stay on the artist employment program. She tried not to let the form take more than 10 minutes each week, and she'd already spent 9 minutes on it. New artists often lost themselves trying to submit their best ideas each week, but since she'd been filling it out for 15 years, she knew the ideas didn't have to be viable, make any sense, or even be good. They were just proof of originality. These creative seeds did not ever have to be cultivated. She honestly didn't even know if an actual human read them, or if passing Bard check was enough to be accepted, or if there was a massive library of writers, musicians, performers, painters, glimpses of creativity that were stored and recorded for the past century or so. All this wondering, however, wasn't helping her get her fourth original idea down. 10 minutes now had passed. She refocused on the keys and wrote, number 4, a wizard buys a private island and rents it out for extra cash, a comedic play. She smiled and was already visualizing the hilarious sequences she could script of a wizard who presumably had the power of magic, but still needed a side hustle. Maybe she would write this play. She clicked Bard check, the last step before submission. 15 minutes total. 5 minutes she lost to this form. Ping. The Bard check had responded. Ping, she said. Ping? She hadn't been pinged on Bard check in over a decade, and yet there it was. Wizard on an island was flagged. Dang, how would she known that was a trigger? The frustrating thing about Bard check is that it checked to see if you were derivative of source material you didn't have legal access to know about in the first place. One sigh later, Ellen rewrote her fourth idea to number 4. A wiener dog buys a grocery store and rents it out for extra cash, a comedic play. This would be fine. 2 dog ideas won't be an issue. Some artists only work with one idea in their medium forever. This time, Bard check accepted her form. She clicked submit and instantly saw her paycheck in her account. This whole form had now taken 20 minutes, 10 minutes stolen from her actual work, being a playwright. This was the work that she needed to do in order to stay in her artist housing with her creative class colleagues, furnished studio, music hall, and rehearsal rooms. She had 24 hours each day to reach her creative output quota, which, like the innovation form, was used to measure her worth, impact, and creativity each day. She wasn't the type of person who worked in frenzied rushes in the middle of the night, preferring instead to rest her ideas at the same time she rested her body, which meant maximizing her daytime hours was essential, even in a society that valued artists first. Fingers flew through her art book. It wasn't the latest model, but of course, it had the most up-to-date Bard check on it, but little else in the way of features. For her, this would suffice, since she worked with text on a page as a playwright. Though at mandatory artist hours to socialize with other creatives, she'd heard monologues about how inefficient the devices were for visual artists and musicians, and they were always looking for more innovation. Often, these grimaces and gripes turned into more innovation as those creative minds used their talents to meet their own needs and then were able to partner with the art book manufacturers for the next version. It was the way of the creative cycle. Ellen never had any innovations for her art book, other than wanting it to stop time, which no level of innovation had reached yet. She swiped across the art book to bring up her latest script in progress. Her eyes scanned the basic black text on the white screen. She often marveled at how such simple typed words, static, quiet, and dead on the page, would eventually be filled with life, breath, and flesh once in the mouths of actors. She found the last scene she had written. It was about a banana pursuing a law degree. At this point in her play, the young banana had broken off from his bunch and ventured into the world alone. She ran her tongue across the front of her teeth, looking for inspiration to move the story forward. Her incisors provided no additional plot points, which was surprising considering her plays starred fruits and vegetables as main characters. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Heather. It always sounds so good when you read it. It's just wonderful. Thank you. Our next book is another that glares into a dystopian future. Virgo by Armand Chowdhury is that rare post-apocalyptic novel that manages to be as convincing in its portrayal of perseverance as it is its portrayal of devastation. Set on a real-life island of silt off the coast of Bangladesh, it's a story of refugees, enslavement, and environmental collapse. All of which sounds serious and dark, and it is. But in Armand's care, it's also much more. And given the wild and wonderful invention on every page, you'll be shaking your head at the author's wizardry as often as you will his ominous vision. Armand, take it away.
Thank you, Peter, for that very kind introduction. I was just thinking today how quickly the year has passed and how surreal it all feels. I remember attending last year's reading as an audience member and listening to the excerpts of all the amazing novels from last year's cohort and thinking that I'll never be able to do what they had done within a year. It seemed outrageously difficult and beyond anything that I had done. But I was already enrolled in the program and I desperately wanted to believe that that I would be able to finish a draft of a novel within a year. Then I met with Peter one-on-one for the first time, and my anxieties didn't disappear exactly, but they receded somewhat once we talked about what I wanted to accomplish with my project in the next year. But it was Peter's wisdom, his excitement, and his faith in my novel that carried me through the year. And it was his words and actions that made me feel that the work that I was doing was important. My fellow cohort members have also been vital in the process of writing my novel. Not only did I have the opportunity to read and engage with their novels in progress and learn many different approaches to craft from their writings, but I also benefited tremendously from their generous feedback, their sharp insights, and their thoughtful recommendations on how to heighten the world I was trying to build, how to make the story I was trying to tell more compelling. Today, I will read the opening from my novel, which hopefully won't take up more than 5 minutes. It's not that long. The only preface you probably need is that the novel, it takes place 50 years in the future, in the year 2071, on a tiny remote island near the Indian Ocean, as Peter already mentioned, which is inhabited by tens of thousands of stateless refugees. The novel is inspired by the more than 1 million Rohingya refugees who have been driven out of Myanmar by their army and who now live in camps, in refugee camps in Bangladesh under inhumane conditions, without citizenship rights to any country. The novel's working title is Silt Island, but I'm sure it'll change again. All right, so here goes. 1. We lined up each morning to sing the national anthem. All 252 of us, 6 a.m. on the dot, on a circular lot near the foot of the island. The same lot where we spent Fridays kneeling on a layer of black tarp, deshelling saltwater crustaceans harvested from the Sundarbans. I didn't find it productive, the morning assembly. I sang mechanically, expelling rote verses and prepackaged sentiments. A stale aftertaste lingered in my chords. At times, I wondered. I suppose for some, the vocal exercise was a necessity, a means to jumpstart their system, those who fidgeted in their crisp jumpsuits, those who struggled to rid themselves of the spectral stink of REM sleep, eyes crusted with rheum. I understood that I was perhaps more capable than others and accepted the suffering that came with it, the twofold curse of being gifted and self-disciplined. I suffered quite a lot. We were girls aged between 7 and 12, trainees hungry for permanent work, the promise of a lifelong contract, orphans, stateless non-people, descendants of illegal migrants, a subset of a larger population floating on a shifting landmass on the Bay of Bengal. Your ancestors may have heard about my ancestors on the news. We were indiscernible from a distance, I assume, snotty, translucent, graceless, though if you care to inspect, some of us were less appalling than others, the stench of incompetence less severe. Some of us having learned to stand with a straighter spine despite our inferior race, a few perhaps even destined for greatness. The singing, a waste of labor, pageantry. The verses, a frenzied exaltation of pastoral land, at best fantastical, at worst saccharine and servile. I'm not going to invoke them here. You can look them up if you wish. The hymn was inked by a mainland poet at the turn of the 20th century, nearly 200 years ago, when the geophysics of the planet were still not governed by man. A different epic. Besides, the language of composition, Bengali, the tongue of our host, is prohibited for use on the island. We were never to practice speaking or thinking in those frequencies. Blasphemy. Yet, it was mandated that their national anthem be engraved in our consciousness. Most of us sang without affect, lacked conviction in our jaws, except those who bent beyond duty and sought recognition, who enjoyed invading the air with foul harmonies, the bottom feeders. They wailed and enunciated, their lips twitching with false loyalty, their knees longing to buckle. They schemed to be trafficked out of the island, vile, insufferable little cretins. These were the same girls who seethed with envy at the sight of me, unable to match the precision with which I labored at the factory, unable to match my flame. So I let them flick my ear and pinch my waist, hold my chin and inspect my face, call me a boy and trip me on the sand. I let them. Then I dreamed of them drowning alive. We were folded clumps of endless proteins, all 252 of us, maybe like viruses, not even alive or only sometimes alive, infectious, carcinogenic, lethal. Still, none of us would dare be non-compliant with the code of conduct. Fenced with metal, the circular lot where we chorused was one of the few open spaces in vicinity kept insulated from dunes of e-waste jettisoned from all over the subcontinent. We were trainee recyclers of machine entrails, human enzymes that metabolize tech refuse. From age 7 to 12, we cultivated skills to become professional recyclers, and the end of which we were either offered a life term at one of the processing centers or evicted from the recycling ward. It was a one-way valve. Those who left this neck of the woods never came back. They flowed toward the eastern banks of the island, outside the purview of Ozone, our employer. The East was a lawless non-place of primitive ecologies, submerged during monsoon and high tide, teeming with feral non-people who led nocturnal lives. Despite our differences, the girls were united in fear of the free wards. Everyone agreed that our best chance of survival was to remain in recycling, our home ward. We applied ourselves day and night, hoping to be spared the horror of deportation, the horror of being devoured by cannibals across the border, by our rabid cousins who were impatient for the flesh of young girls. The problem was, not all of us were good enough not to be eaten. Thank you.
Thank you, Armand. It amazes me year after year, group after group, the improvement from the first time that we hear and read these stories to the last time that we hear and read these stories. And so far with each of the readings tonight, it's proven itself true again. The prose is better and improved. The pacing is better and improved. But more than anything, I think the storytelling itself is improved and better. And I'm so proud of all of you so far. And I'm sure I will be of our last two readers as well. My favorite novels wind and wend through great swaths of time. And Jim Osgard's Drift is just such a novel. More than 40 years pass in this story centered on the mysterious and unsolved disappearance of two girls in a small southeastern Minnesota town. But this is not a singular story. On the contrary, it's a story about family and community, about loss and love, about the curious geology of a unique part of the country, and about racial tensions in this part of the country. It's written in lyrical prose. The fulsome plot of this novel makes it a page turner for sure, but one to be savored on each page. Jim, you're up.
Of course, I want to thank Peter Guy and the 8 other talented writers of our year-long project. I've tried for years to start writing this novel, and with their help and encouragement, I not only started the novel, but finished a complete first draft. I also thank my wife, Shelley, who has adjusted her retirement plans so that I could pursue this goal. She's always encouraging. And today happens to be my mother's birthday. She would have been 109. I thank her for reading to me at bedtime stories of the Trojan War from the Iliad, from Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, all the others that she read to me, and for her constantly telling me I can achieve anything I desire. It's still meaningful more than 60 years later. There's some, I want to give a little bit of a synopsis or a little background of my novel. In the rural Midwest, a pair of 18-year-old girls disappear on their way to a graduation party at an isolated gravel pit in 1971. Most people of Malm believe the girls were runaways, but some begin to believe they may have been victims, perhaps of the mysterious and enchanted land surrounding the little town, and some begin to blame a man they see as an outsider. The book is about the town and how its citizens address the mystery of the missing girls as decades go by. The land around Malm is one of the book's characters. Geologically, it is called karst topography, densely populated with features like sinkholes, caves, springs, disappearing streams, and underground rivers. I'm reading a scene from about the middle of the book set 19 years after the girls disappear. Danny is the little brother of one of the missing girls. He is now 27, introverted and eccentric, and works as a farmhand. Jill Savory is the daughter of one of the farmers Danny works for. She is 17, and she and Danny are baling hay in this scene. She is very bright and talented. She will play a major role in solving the mystery of the missing girls 25 years hence. The Beck is a creek that winds through Malm and out past the gravel pit where the girls disappeared, and is the most active feature of the enchanted landscape of the story. This scene is intended to develop these characters and show how they relate to each other. The killdeer was Jill's favorite bird because of its trick when encountering a predator near its nest of pretending to have a broken wing and hopping off in a direction that draws the danger away. Killdeer liked to nest in her father's hayfields. She'd often nearly tripped over them while crossing the fields on foot. The first summer she'd been allowed to operate the square baler, she'd tried to avoid running over nests with machinery, an effort that left hay standing in the field and made her dad furious and did no good anyway. Nests could not be seen from the tractor. Regardless, driving the farm all today, Jill stared into the window ahead for any sign of a nest, slowing for suspect shadows, imagining the tearing of steel prongs through feathers, bills, tiny hearts. The tractor's engine had a stuttering but repetitive, steady rhythm. With the squeaking belts and motors of the baler, Jill's musical mind soon found tempo, and a melody popped into her head, a song one of her girlfriends loved, currently #1 on the radio. Jill began swaying on the tractor seat, hands gripping the steering wheel. She sang with the tractor's accompaniment. Hold on to your love, put, put, put. Ooh, ooh, baby, hold on, put, put, put. She turned her head to check on Danny. He was standing on the hayrack with his feet apart, knees bent slightly, hands on his hips. He looked back at her with a bland expression, like someone in a lab coat noting a specimen's behavior. At the end of the third windrow, Jill tugged the tractor's steering wheel a quarter turn clockwise and held it until the baler and hay rack were aligned and following her back up the slope. She checked on Danny again. He was steadying himself against the stacked bales, a white scarecrow in the sun. Then the bank swallows appeared behind them, stirred from nests burrowed in the Beck's mud walls. Scores of them flew straight up out of the ground as if released by the earth. Danny turned to look back toward the creek. The sight made Jill recall a television magician who raised a wand and made a flock of doves appear. The swallows, pale underneath, wings stretched in black silhouette, brown feather bands across their chests, swarmed above the field, then assembled into a churning globe which descended upon Jill and Danny. Birds dove and arced through the moving machinery, the girl and man, and past one another, like smoke through blades of a fan. Jill felt the air stir with wings. Suddenly there was no chugging tractor or winding belts and pulleys, only the beating, the turbulence, the enclosing staccato squawks and shrieks. She cranked the wheel around and moved into the fifth row, the bright sun again beating on her back. Flickers of wings and flashes of bright bellies, dizzying and disorienting. The birds turned every surface into a kaleidoscope of spinning shadows and light, on her hands and arms, upon the great turning tires, across the tractor's shiny blood-red hood, over the stubbly, dry green ground below its wheels. Jill, enchanted, made only a quick glance at the road to keep the tractor straight. In her head now, she heard measures from Mozart, chamber music. She raised her right arm, conducting, snapped it down with the beat. She closed the thumb and fingers of her left hand as she swept it inward to her chest as if to phase out a movement. Her torso leaned in, leaned back, her right arm shot out, her index finger jabbed. Letting go of the wheel, Jill's arms sliced the air. The orchestra responded. Scores of swooping, tuxedoed musicians feasted on thousands of hopping, flying, flipping bugs, driven from the dry windrows as the tractor and machinery advanced. Far above, a pair of red-tailed hawks floated, nearly stationary, barely more than specks against the vast dark blue sky. When he'd heard the swallows and turned to see them fly up from the beck, Danny thought of the bats, the evening he stood below the abandoned barn near his house at the edge of town. The door to its hayloft had rotted and fallen off. He'd watched for 20 minutes as brown bats launched over his head into the twilight. This afternoon, he wondered why the swallows had waited so long after the bailing began to come for the bugs. He wondered why they'd swarmed all at once. He tried to follow individual birds on their sorties through the cloud of insects, and he imagined some were despondent. He heard keens of frustration among the other noises. He picked up the next bale. As he turned with it, he glimpsed a writhing bit of tan and brown rope about as thick as his thumb, bowing out of the bale like an eye hook. Near this, strapped by twine, was another short length of it, with a tiny pair of black eyes and a serpent's mouth, wide in a fading hiss. Bull snake, said Danny to himself under the clatter of the machinery. He wedged the bale in place between two others, turning mechanically to receive the next. The tractor drove steadily forward. Danny saw Jill throw her head back and laugh at a streaking swallow that had nearly brushed her nose. The birds played with Jill until the bailing was done.
That's striking, Jim. Thank you very much for that. And we come to our final reader of the night. Some stories are meant to be written and read slowly, and Faye Engstrom's Suffer the Children is one of them. Inspired by authors like Marilyn Robinson and Kazuo Ishiguro, Faye is a patient and penetrating writer, and her story of a medical student entangled in her Mormon faith and a relationship she's not sure she wants is lyrical and ethically and morally profound. But more than any of this, it's simply beautiful and urgent and the kind of book that will leave you thinking about the most important things in life long after you're done reading it. Faye, why don't you wrap it up for us tonight?
Thank you, Peter, for that introduction and especially for the last year of wonderful leadership and mentorship and patience and all of the teaching that you did. It's been a terrific year. I also want to thank everybody in my workshop. I'm going to miss you so much. Tuesday nights were the highlight of the week, and I'm looking forward to holding all of your novels in my hands. I'm also really grateful to the Loft for sponsoring this workshop. I'm going to read a few pages from the middle of my novel. It's chapter 13, so it's almost right smack in the middle. Rachel is the protagonist. She's a medical student. She's about 26 years old, just about to graduate from medical school. She wants to be a pediatrician. She's been following a 27-week preemie, baby lamb, who she's very attached to and very invested in. And the baby's about to have surgery to correct a heart defect. And the surgeon is a very famous, locally famous heart surgeon, pediatric heart surgeon, but he also has a high position in the Mormon church. And he's somebody that Rachel has long admired and patterned her life after and her dreams after. So this is chapter 13. A spotlight went on. The crib was on fire. The baby naked and exposed. The sudden brightness seemed to startle her. She grimaced and narrowed her eyes. Rachel marveled at the child's facial expressions, which spoke of personality, consciousness, personhood. She thought how Emerson said that every natural fact was a symbol of some spiritual fact, that the baby had first been made in heaven before coming to earth, made in the very image of God. An alarm sounded, a nurse tended to it. Baby lamb opened her eyes to the sound, looked around, then closed them again, seeming to settle into a sort of primal peace, wanting nothing, regretting nothing, unconcerned with the fretting and fussing around her. She lay above it somehow, like a beautiful naked goddess. The team crowded in to surround the bassinet. Anesthesiologist, cardiac fellow, a couple of nurses, and Rachel's old friend, Mike. Rachel and Mike were medical students together, and he's on the cardiac surgery service as a student. They were all clad in the same surgical blue. They towered over baby lamb, the smallest nurse weighing at least 100 times the preemie. In the shadows, the baby took on a sickly complexion. She did not stir as the team went to work, drawing up drugs, rearranging instruments, then rearranging them again, fussing with pumps and ventilator settings, dialing things up and down, their individual motions lost amid the edgy, continual swirling motions of the group. Finally, everything ready, the nurses carefully moved the baby to the top of the bassinet, trailing along the myriad of attached lines and tubes, positioning the arms out of the way above her head in full surrender, splaying her legs apart with a bend at the knees, specimen-like, akin to a salamander under dissection. On seeing the baby in this position, an inexplicable sadness welled up inside Rachel. She'd always felt a natural sympathy for the downtrodden, whether they be human or animal. She held back tears and tried to force herself into indifference. There was no crying in medicine. People simply had to get on with the task at hand, and action helped more than outbursts of emotion. A pediatrician would be tired in an instant, Rachel thought, if she let herself feel the full weight of sickness and sadness encountered in the NICU and the PICU and the ER and the OR. She prayed for rescue from the pity and doubt which kept rising up inside her. A nurse scrubbed the baby's skin with betadine, another caustic touch, another imprinting, a new astringent mother. Again, Rachel found herself fighting off an unwanted emotion. It was because she was so tired, she thought, this sense of foreboding, as if something awful was about to happen. To be sure, the coming procedure was awful, no matter how clinical one tried to be about it. Baby lamb would soon be sliced open, blood would be shed, and a surgeon's hand would rummage around the heart. And despite the practiced professionalism and the good intentions, it was a risky procedure, and the outcome could not yet be known. A crude sign, probably made by a parent, was fastened to the adjoining bassinet. Quote, "Where there is great love, there are always miracles," end quote. The sign reminded Rachel that baby Lamb's adoptive parents had arrived. They were coming from California. The baby was born premature to a 17-year-old. So baby Lamb's adoptive parents had arrived, but had elected not to see their new daughter until after the surgery, thinking things would be easier if they hadn't met her. It'd be easier for everyone if they hadn't met her, Rachel thought, but that seemed quite beside the point. She wondered if miracles were reserved only for the babies who were loved, the way priesthood blessings were reserved only for babies who had someone that cared enough to ask for one. The nurse placed a drape around the baby. As if on cue, Meyer, the great surgeon, stepped forward, parting the sea of blue. He made no response to the obsequious bows greeting him. "Is this a boy or a girl?" he asked with stunning indifference. He eyed the opening in the drape, the surgical field, the only external part of the child that he would likely ever see. Without waiting for an answer, he turned to Mike and asked, "What about the blood work?" Clearly, Mike didn't know, but before he could stammer his ignorance, the fellow reported that all the labs were normal. "If you can't keep up with the data," Meyer said to Mike, "how can you keep up with the science?" Mike lowered his head. Rachel felt a flush of shame as she remembered her own humiliation at Meyer's hands. That came earlier in the novel. She wondered why, instead of asking about a CBC, this prince of the church didn't ask about a blessing. If the man believed in miracles, if he believed that his priesthood power could make the difference between life and death, if he believed that practical science could be aided by faith healing and spiritual gifts, why didn't he ask about a blessing as insistently as he asked about the blood? Meyer turned his back to Mike and recited the cases he'd done and the cases he'd yet to do that day, as if trying to settle something in his mind. It was a ponderous list. Still, his voice grated painfully on Rachel's ears. And even though he didn't turn her way or acknowledge her presence, she gave him a look of disapproval. A nurse sprayed the great man's hands with antiseptic, then gowned and gloved him. He took his place next to the baby and held out an open hand, which tremored slightly. When he took hold of the scalpel, his hand settled. Rachel suspected that Meyer had the resting tremor of early Parkinson's disease. She also suspected, as she saw the fellow and Mike exchange glances, that she hadn't been the only one to notice. If his hand trembled, his manner was firm, confident, insistent in its claim for respect, which calmed Rachel's sense of foreboding. She reasoned that Meyer had been operating for over 30 years. He'd easily done 10,000 cases. Even with a slight shake, surely his practiced hands could successfully operate on baby 10,001 without too much trouble. She imagined that cardiac surgery had become mechanical to him, part of his physiology, like a gene producing protein or the electrical impulses stimulating his heartbeat. In the face of such competence, perhaps there was no need for divine help, no place for the humility that bows beneath the throne of God, begging for blessing. I'll stop there.
Bravo, Faye. These readings have been fantastic. Just beautiful, practiced, pro level, I'd even say. I mentioned earlier how much this group and how much this time together inspires me. And it's true, inspires me in all sorts of ways. Makes me want to be a better writer, a more diligent writer, a more enthusiastic writer. But it also, these days and these months, the weeks that we've spent together have taught me a lot as well. I've learned from everyone, both on the page and in our conversations, and I thank you all for that. I consider you my friends now, my colleagues, and I can't wait to see where the months and years ahead take you. You're ready to finish the next draft and to write the next book and to continue this work that we're all engaged in, this essential work, the work of telling each other's stories. We're the only people in the world that do this particular brand of work. Not just the 7 of us or the 8 of us, but novelists and writers and poets. And it's more important now than ever. So congratulations to all of you. I couldn't be more proud. I couldn't be more honored to have spent the last year working with you. So thank you all. And that's a wrap. That's a wrap for the night. Jen mentioned earlier, I think we'll go ahead and stop the recording now.